Hello to you, Bucks.
How are you, Gerard? Yeah, I reckon the Thursday to Tuesday is long enough that you're out of your cave for Damien Hardwick. You've got him on nearly the perfect, most reflective moments as a coach. And obviously he's an experienced coach and he's had a lot of success. So he's got the cachet and having that under his belt, you can speak with some authority and you've got the comfort of knowing that you've been successful. But yeah, you've got the sweet spot there. You're not going to get those sort of answers and those sort of reflections in many other places other than the week immediately following the season or the end of a team's season or a club's season, because it closes up during the year, as we know, and it will close up a little bit down the track as well.
How do you read the forecasting of the conversation with Jack Riewoldt today?
I think there's only one way to read that. I don't think you would say that that there's potentially going to be some arguments unless there is an opinion from the club that it might be better off to move on. That's without having that specifically being said. And I suppose the job of the people in front of the microphones is to try and speculate and to try and make sense of what you've heard and seen. But I would suspect that for Damien to say that there may be a suggestion, and he might be of the opinion that in Jack's best interest that it's time as well. The jumper comes first, as he said, and the club comes first, and the team comes first. But when you've shared a journey the way that Dimmer and Jack have, there's no doubt that there's skin in the game for the individual as well, and the empathy that comes from it. And he may not believe that, and we don't know what happens behind closed doors, although they're both pretty open people, and Jack in particular is an open person. But there might be, and the coach himself might be projecting to seeing other people come into that role. He might have had some situations this year where he ummed and ahed on whether he was going to keep Jack in the side, and the player himself might not be aware of those conversations with the match committee or the senior coach. And the coach might not want to be in that position where he has to put him in the VFL if he's got that much respect for him, I suppose. But that's just, maybe it's an acknowledgement of what the next 12 months may look like for you and how we're going to deal with that and would it work for you. And that's probably why the lowball part has come through in terms of a contract offer, because it needs to reflect where you sit in the planning going forward.
How delicate is the balance? And Richmond, Geelong have lived this, is retaining champions or renewing, and they're clearly aggressively trying to bring players in, and that comes with a big price. Trent Cotchin and Jack Riewoldt represent the absolute leadership of the very best years. How delicate the balance between honouring your champions, continuing your champions, renewing and trying to... Well, they've ended up finishing 7th, haven't they? So there's a bit to gain.
My instant reaction when you use the word champions is I think that's nearly like a Messiah complex. Like, I think you're either recruiting great leadership, people that you want to build, and obviously they're good footballers, and some of them are exceptional footballers, but you're recruiting great leadership, people that you build, that you see as your spine to build the team around. And then you're recruiting... whether they're I don't necessarily if they're champions, but they're players that you think are going to fit your team structure. What we have seen consistently, what we saw with Richmond, we saw some names in Richmond's premiership side that we wouldn't have said are champions, but they came together under a really solid leadership. And they had Dustin Martin was a gun and was able to pull all of that together and play amazing football at the death when it was required. But they had a really solid team dynamic, a buy-in to a way of playing, a way of treating each other, a way of finding their best. And it wasn't necessarily built on champions as such. It was built on really solid leadership, and then you had the cream on the cake. So we've seen that with Sydney. We see it with Collingwood at the moment. We see it with Geelong. It's not just the top level. It's not just your leadership. It's actually your last six. Like, how committed are those players? So sometimes if you pay too much at the top, you're going to pay the penalty between 15 and 25. And if you don't get 15 to 25 right, I don't think you can win finals, because if those players can't stand up, you're going to fall over when it matters.
What would you want to hear from Dustin Martin? So it's really clear, I think, that he's staying at Richmond for all that's been going around.
Yeah.
So I don't think Damien speaks last night like that unless he absolutely knows. So that's, put that part aside, is he's lived a difficult year in his life, separate to football. But the next 2 years he's on $2.6 million. So you talk about the high end.
Yeah.
You better be the club's best player with that wage associated with it, or something around that. What would you need? What would you be hoping to hear from Dustin Martin in your exit meeting?
That you have had the time necessary and felt supported by the club and by your coach to want to repay that faith going forward. I think that he's done a lot for the football club, but as you said, there's money invested in him beyond now. So you draw the line at now, and everything that he's done up to now. Maybe Dustin feels like part of that 2.6 has been pushed back from previous years, and I've actually already earned that, and this is your time in the sun type thing. But I don't get that sense. I mean, I sense that the relationship between coach and player, and the club and the player is really solid and grounded, and based on not just on what you can give us on the field, but what you have given us in the past, and the journey that we have travelled together. And I think that's a really good place to be. And Dustin Martin's not accountable for the money that he's going to be paid going forward. The club had to agree to that. So the club and the player are equally accountable to what happens in the next couple of years. I think that they have supported Dustin really well. It seems like they have. I think that we can't assume that we're going to get the best version of ourselves every day, because that's not reality. It doesn't happen. But a professional's job is to try and find it more often than not, even when they're not feeling great. But there is a break point, and Dustin may have reached that break point at times this year. But the utterances of Dimmer would suggest that he's in better shape now than he was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, and that he's going to put in a really solid pre-season. And if he does that, we know that he's going to be a very influential player for Richmond going forward. And
the last one around the Tigers scenario. So the 7-year contract for Tim Taranto, so we don't know the dollar value of it, so the spreading of money is tenure and the spread of money as opposed to 7 years at top dollar. But the idea, it feels to me there's a section of the football economy that revolves around players drafted to the Giants who got contracts throughout their careers that if they were just in the general populace, they never would have got, either to stay at the Giants or to be blasted out of the Giants. Extravagant years, and I suspect in plenty of cases, extravagant money. The 7 years, that's such a long-term contract for a player like Tim Taranto, who I think is a good player.
Yeah, and I don't think any one arrangement, either tenure or quantum, when we talk about contracts and a player, I don't think, and a club, I don't think any one arrangement gives us, we can even comment on it, because we don't have the perspective of what that list looks like in terms of its TPP, and not only what it looks like now, but what it looks like in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. And that's why the list management role becomes so crucial, because he's the one with his hands on the numbers, with his idea of the projections going forward, that has to have the conversations with the recruiting manager, with the match committee, the director of footy, to work out where we're going to go with this. So Tim Taranto might be at 7 years at whatever quantum, might be a great investment for Richmond given what's coming and going around them in the next 3 or 4 years. I would suggest that Lance Franklin was and the long-term deal with that. There's always a little bit of cream to try and grab people from places, and Taranto's, whether it's an extra year or two and an extra 100,000 here or there, I think it happened. It sounds like it's going to happen with Taranto. It happened with Lance Franklin to get him up to Sydney. It happened with Alistair Lynch to get him up to Brisbane way back when, on a 10-year deal, which was at that stage was like what,
Yeah.
And then he ends up he was getting paid unders at the end, so it can work to the club's favour as well. But you've got to be managing that list pretty well if you want to put a long-term deal. You need to know they're going to be a mainstay in your side for that period of time, and you need to know that that they're made of the right stuff, and you believe that they're going to be something that you're going to build your team around in that period.
Yeah. The examples you've given, so the comparisons that you've given are true greats. This is where I think if Tim Taranto goes pick 2 to who would have been down there at the time. Well, let's just say Collingwood.
Yes.
He does 2 years, followed by 3 years. He might get a 4-year deal along the way, and then he pegs back to 3 and 2. But by virtue of going to the Giants, and he's in the set with Cornelio and Kelly, I reckon you could probably list 10. I haven't done the work in behind it. Just that section of the football economy is unique to getting drafted to the Giants, either what you got to stay or what you got to get blasted out.
Well, what you're describing is what the circumstances of the market could be at the Giants. And I think every club has a different market environment. Some of it, the players own the market, and some of it, the clubs own the whip hand. And I think the relationships with managers underpins that. And I was a little naive to this when I first walked in to senior coaching, is just how critical the relationship of the list manager and the recruiting manager with, and even the director of footy with the managers are, because they're the ones that are pulling the strings on moving players around and encouraging them to go here, go there. But I see Geelong as a side, as an attractive proposition, as a club, an attractive proposition, probably a better quality of life in regards to being a little bit one out, one back, and not as the centre of attention as much. And the cost of living is probably a little bit, if you compare the cost of living with Geelong with Sydney, for instance, I think you get a better quality of life down there than you will in Sydney. So the Giants. So it's nearly like it's a club market, and they've held the whip hand, and they've said, this is the way we pay our players, and they seem to have done that for a long period of time. But if you're in a club as you're a players market, and the list manager's a little bit more, we'll give you that extra 50 to get you across the line, or we'll give you that extra 100, or we'll give you that extra year or two, that can go south real quick.
This is, Nathan Buckley, the unique dynamic. Huge emotional high typically for the elimination final winners, and that's absolutely true from home environments, from the Lions and the Dockers. And somewhere between disappointment and crestfallen is to so narrowly missing qualifying finals and walk the long route. What is this dynamic come semi-finals?
It is really interesting. I think even the two vanquished coaches, the Melbourne in Simon Goodwin and Collingwood with Craig McRae, have two slightly different messages that have filtered through, that have cut through. So Goodwin's there was about dynamic, about mechanics, about how they played, and that we're not far off, and that there was good validation in the way we played, and we played a team that was hot on the night. You're gonna have to face that, but. And then McRae's was about attitude straight away. Bang. Our attitude is, no, we're not done. And you don't do this. If you want to be a winner, if you want to, and his rhetoric has been around, every day, preparing to be a winner, that these are the actions that do not resonate with being winners. So they're both very quickly sort of got their players back on projecting forward, and that's you have to because there's a game to prepare for and to win on either Friday or Saturday for them. So I think they've publicly done it well. And in the end, you know that any team that finishes in the top four has got the buy-in of each other. The coaches are connected with the players. You don't finish up there without having a really solid feeling for each other and with each other, and that doesn't go away after one loss. So that's why they're both going to be in fairly good shape going into this weekend, and for the rest of the final series, for that matter. Depending whoever goes into the prelims. I mean, if Collingwood and Melbourne go back to that and they swap sides, Collingwood go up to Sydney and Melbourne take on Geelong, they would still give themselves a really good chance, as you do when you go in as a preliminary final side.
Yep.
Fremantle and Brisbane on the other side, I mean, they would both feel really good about themselves. And I saw some stuff that I really liked about both of them.
All right, so we'll go to those in a tick. Just give us your experiences. So 2007, you play a semi-final against West Coast that goes to extra time, which is just an extraordinary game.
Yep.
And then come back and go the distance in a preliminary final. So you're off an elimination final win there.
Sydney.
In 2012, you're off a loss and you come back through West Coast. In 2018, you're off a loss, West Coast in Perth, and just take care of business against the Giants and plot your way to one of the great preliminary final wins. And then I guess 2020 is you live the extreme emotion of the most magnificent elimination finals win. And you told us last week there was nothing left in the tank as it turned out when you rolled out in a semi-final.
Yeah, so I suppose you always I think that the pre-finals bye changes things. So it does change the dynamic. So when you're looking back at 2007, you look at 12, and then you sort of project to 18, 19 even, where we actually went through to a prelim and then got done. So I've lived all of those sort of iterations, I suppose. But the pre-finals bye does change things. It sort of freshens everyone up a bit. So potentially you should be able to run the 4 weeks better than you would have if you hadn't had that week. Whether you're a top 4 team or a bottom or a 5th to 8th team. But yes, I think it's not always apparent from the exterior how a team is actually travelling internally. I would assume, as I said, that Melbourne and Collingwood are still in really good nick internally, given that they've finished the season pretty well. Melbourne have had that validation. It's been rocked a little, and they've got some question marks now about Petrarca, Spargo, how they're going to actually come together. Are they going to be able to connect inside forward 50 to be able to take advantage of their work in the back 2/3 of the ground? They'll be working on that this week, and they'll believe that they're going to go in with a plan to be able to execute that. They're going against a side that hasn't been able to defend that very well, and a side that they've got really good experience against in Brisbane. So they're going to believe. And Collingwood, I think, will just keep going. But I believe that Fremantle will be a stiffer challenge than most would suspect. I do believe that they've got the capacity to produce a 4-quarter pressure performance that will challenge Collingwood, and a defensive structure that will keep them in the game for quite a while.
Give us the Brisbane side of the equation. So this is the archetypal bad matchup from the final series last year to 2 wallopings, one at the MCG and one at the Gabba. The Lions have lived a week where nobody believed in them, and they delivered for themselves against that. And I suspect it's even more intense. I suspect they're even more dismissed this week than they were last week.
Yeah, I know that there's not going to be a lot of not going to be many people that are going to give Brisbane any chance, really. I saw something in their body language, in their demeanour against Richmond. Now, they may not have – they could have ended up losing that game, but I thought that their capacity to – it looked to me like they just was – there was a steely focus throughout the team. So McInerney goes down, and it's just like, it's not no fuss. We just moved on. They just moved on and they got it done. Didn't have Rayner, didn't have Ainsworth. Made a hard decision on Lyons because he clearly can play because he played the day after. He can still clearly run around, but made the decision that he's not fit enough to to contribute the way we need in this game. So there's some hard decisions made, but it seemed to me like even when they had a good moment, there was steely resolve, stay in the moment. Even when they had a bad moment, steely resolve, and that I've got no doubt that kept them in the game and gave them a chance to win. And it was nearly like all of the outside doesn't matter. Even this occasion doesn't matter. It's just about us doing this the way that we want to do it and doing it to the best of our capacity. And there seemed to be whatever Chris Fagan and the coaching group and the playing group had committed to, it seemed to me to come through as a real steely resolve. So I would suspect that same message will be whatever that was, will be the thread of how they approach this game against Melbourne at the MCG. And that, in fact, the echoes of last week and the attitude of last week could actually have them in a much better stead than they might have been in any other game against Melbourne in recent times. So I was emboldened by what I saw. It may not be enough, but I think we'll get the best of Brisbane.
I was curious. So last week you said around the coaching technique is you can't throw things around going into an elimination final. Form's just a little bit off, but you just signal to the players, hey, I've lost faith as well. What about in the specific matchup that runs against you? I was thinking about the inverse. If you don't flip it around, do the players, well, are we just doing the same thing again? We're getting beaten? Or are they looking to you, give us something different to change the dynamic? And what's that tension point like?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the art piece of coaching is how much do you keep? You know, so some coaches, when we're talking about this on being different ends of the spectrum, some will say, well, I'll keep 90% of our base and then play with the 10. And others will say, well, I'll keep 50, but I'll play with the 50. And if I'll keep 50 the same, but then I'll swap 50%, I'll swap half of it, you feel like everything's changing all the time. But if you play 90 and then 10, you go, okay, well, there's enough of a focus on this particular aspect against this particular opponent because of this evidence that we've been given, then that's sold into the group as a key focus. And they can be different every week.
Yep.
But it's a different part of our DNA of our game that can attack and beat and pull apart that opposition on this occasion. One of the things that's happened by Osmo, and some things happen outside of your control. So for the Lions, they've taken out one of the guys that usually is their key ruck, and now they've pulled one of their forwards, either McStay or Danaher at times, has gone into a ruck role and actually competed pretty well. McStay had a pretty good game. So that dynamic shift is already there. So they've gone, well, that actually didn't hurt us. Maybe we can find an advantage in this. So we've got an undersized ruckman who's going to go up against Gawn and Jackson, and maybe we get an advantage here, and maybe that's enough of a shift. So that's part of the 90 now that's been forced to be different, unless they decide to bring another ruckman in, or Darcy Fort comes in. But there will be a shift, and there will be a difference of some sort, and it might actually, in the short term, be more beneficial than actually going in with what you've always rolled in with. But that's in the art of being able to sell that opportunity to your playing group and then believing it and then going and rolling with it and see how you go.
The tension piece around playing injured players in finals, Nathan, you would have dealt with this every year that you're involved in September, I'm sure. What's the risk reward? How do you make your decisions, and can you ever be right, or are you just in the wind on these?
I think you're only right when you get the result. And sometimes you can have a player that you take a risk on that breaks down or that doesn't get there and you win, and then does that mean you're right? It doesn't mean you're right, but it means that you've got away with it as a match committee. But ultimately, I think that you love things to be black and white, and you like to think you treat all people equally, but you don't. There are some players that actually handle being 80% and can still be really, really productive and play their role and be quite influential. There are some that can't be 95%. If they're 95%, well then you shouldn't play them based on their experience if they've got a niggle here or a niggle there, because they blow themselves up with their thoughts and their anxiety. So to know the individual is important. So by definition, there needs to be an experience piece in that, in knowing the player and have been in a situation where it's backfired or it hasn't worked. And that doesn't always happen in loss, because obviously there's individual elements of performance. So it might be just for an individual to go, oh, look, you know, back of the mind that player has struggled with carrying injury. But then again, players evolve and players change as well. So there might be a time when you need to take that risk. It's because it's always got to be based on, all right, so who's the next guy in? There might be such a big gap between this player in this role and plan B that, no, well, plan A, even though it's not at 100%, is going to be our best bet. So we'll roll with that. And you don't always know all the parameters of how these decisions are made. Yep. So it's so easy to look at, all right, played a player who wasn't quite 100% fit, Dustin Martin, didn't win the game, bad decision. It's not that simplistic. There's far more that goes into it.
What would be the temptation to give Christian Petrarca the time to recover from this and not play on Friday night, knowing that if you're going to win it, you've got to win 3 in a row, and presumably he won't get substantially better by playing. Your best chance of him getting to the level of fitness that he would like would be to have the week off and front up in a preliminary final. But you'll be accused of assuming you're going to win and resting him.
No, yeah, you definitely, it's elimination final, so you need to win to go in. So, but your proposition would definitely be a consideration. It wouldn't be something that a conversation that you would have with the player, because the player is just saying, I'll do whatever it needs to be done, assuming that I'm not going to break down. So and what has come out of Melbourne has been really clear and really upfront in saying that Christian's can't hurt himself any further, which is technically not true, because he could, absolutely. But they've pushed the needle up to that point that he's fine and he'll be right to play and he'll go. But there will be conversations around, do we take that risk? 2, is there a capacity of us making a prudent decision now, feeling that we can get the job done, taking the risk of getting that job done and giving ourselves a better chance beyond it if we were to win? That would definitely be part of the conversation. And you're not just thinking about winning a semi-final. You're actually thinking about winning a semi-final to put yourself in a chance to go and win a prelim and then ultimately a grand final. So sometimes there will be medium-term decisions, if we call 3 weeks a medium-term, that are worth making to take a greater risk in the short term. But that'll be up for Melbourne. We had one in 2018. Darcy Moore had not played for 6 weeks. He'd only played 5 or 6 games that year, and he'd only finished 3 of them, I reckon. He'd had hammy injuries. Yep. And he trained the house down, you know, in the last training session leading into the 2018 grand final. Tyson Goldsack was playing on Josh Kennedy, and he'd come off an ACL and only played the qualifying final. Played one. I think he had half a game of footy in the VFL, and then we pushed him straight in off an ACL. So he was clearly, we were trying to find guys to fill that role. Darcy Moore trained the house down, and I actually posed the question to our match committee: if we got just 50% of game time, if we got just a half out of Darcy Moore, would we roll with this? So if we knew that we were going to get him to at least half time and then he was going to break down sort of halfway through the third, would we roll with it? Do you think that there's more benefit in that than going with Goldie, who is playing a little bit out of position or a lot undersized and not quite, ACL, he could go 5 minutes in. Yep. And ultimately we chose not to. And Darcy himself had actually got his head around, I think I can go for you. And he trained 40 minutes flat out on the Tuesday, and we made the call not to. But, was that the wrong decision? we didn't get the win, and Josh Kennedy had some influential moments. Whether Darcy was there for that, whether he was going to be able to different. So they're the marginal calls that I think can make all the difference.
When you raised the question, were you advocating the position, or were you just curious what everyone's view would be?
In my own mind, I had to get to the position in my own mind that it was a viable option to put it on the table. So it was a viable option in my mind, and it was. Now that I've brought it up, it's brought up some demons. But because you don't know what the what ifs are. He could have broken down 2 minutes in, and we could have been stuffed and not given ourselves a chance, because you have to move your magnets around to a point where you're unrecognisable. But it was a marginal call that we went with what we won the last 2 games with. And there will be teams, whether we know about it or not. I mean, that was not a highly publicised decision.
Yeah.
But there will be teams that in the next couple of weeks that will be making judgment calls like that, potentially on players that would make the difference between winning or losing. So it's not just, and this is do or die. You don't. There's no tomorrow on these. So your question on Petrarca is a really interesting one, but it's one that they will be considering.
Jack wants to know: would the medical sub change how you were thinking about the Darcy Moore scenario and how it fits into the game right now?
Yes, it would have. Thanks, Jack. I reckon it would have. It definitely gives you a little bit. Because the medical sub let's call it for what it is now. It's a fourth reserve that that is being used a little bit more aggressively than it was earlier in previous seasons. So you can definitely use it for that, or you can have it as that stopgap, and that's why we should really never question why a certain medical sub is used. And we know that we did it. Fagan had a ruckman there at one stage. Collingwood had Kruger, which happened to work. I thought worked for them on the weekend. But and Mason Cox at one point. So there's always different reasons why you choose a medical sub. Not all of them make sense to the outside.
Last one, it's the arc here. So I thought we'd play the independent voice was Simon Goodwin last night with us. So Damien Hardwick is deeply invested and well he should be, and the rest of us are observers. This is a fellow coach and what he thought of the overall from a goal to a behind on the Lynch kick.
I think we all sat there a little bit shocked at the end of it.
That was a really interesting and valuable insight, I think.
Well, that's where I was. It's not necessarily on whether it was a goal or not. It was about process. And there wasn't anything that we saw, and we're assuming in the lounge room that we are seeing all the vision, and the snicko is not possible because it's above the point post, and you think you're using every mechanism at your disposal to be able to make a call that is definitive. And if it's not definitive, well, then it goes back to the umpire's call. That's what I always thought. So there's nothing, as it's happening, there's nothing there. This might not be a goal, but there's nothing there that can change and take you away from the fact the umpire called a goal, and there's nothing definitive, so it's going to go back to a goal. There was no evidence to be definitive either way. But so process that I've understood wasn't followed. And so I'm with Goody on that one. Mm. But it doesn't help Richmond supporters.
No, it doesn't.
Right,
it doesn't help Damien Hardwick either. So the offer is to step through it. And I take it that he's wrestling with, does he really want to be stepped through it? Hey, so while we're deep in it, did you ever get an answer on the Maynard block? Or would it give you any? I
think that when that's never going to be definitive, is
it?
Yeah, I think, and if the fact that happened in the last minute and a half, highlights it. There's probably, even we're talking Craig McRae talking about not being rewarded for our tackles. I mean, if you have something that happens at the 13-minute mark of the second quarter, at the 60 metres out from goal, it may well be just as significant as something that happens with 30 seconds to go in the last quarter and to win or lose the game. So, as in an arc decision. So we go to that. I thought it could have been paid, but no, that is part of the game. And there is, as much as we don't like to acknowledge it, there is a little bit of luck that comes into play when you get two sides that are so evenly matched, that have a similar intent and a will to win. Something needs to separate you somewhere, and sometimes it can be an intangible bit of good fortune.